Hello, my name is Timothy Ayafella, and this is my formal presentation. My topic is relational development and maintenance. So the first question is, what is a relationship? A relationship is when two parties come together to form a union and create a unit in which they show each other affections, and be it intimacy or a business relationship. So, I will be talking about the different perspectives, particularly the developmental perspective of relational development. A man named Mark Knapp made a model describing the developmental perspective of relationships. And in this, he showed the patterns of communication within relationships change as the time within a relationship goes. It describes the rise and fall of relationships, and he divides it into 10 stages, showing the first 5 and the last 5 stages of how relationships rise and fall. So with this model, he was particularly descriptive of intimate, romantic relationships and close friendships. The 10 stages he made, the first 5 describe the rise of a relationship. And it starts with initiating, experimenting, intensifying, integrating, and bonding. With this, he shows how a relationship starts and rises to form a social unit, and how it describes itself in a social background as a relationship. And the last 5 stages of a developmental model he makes, he talks about differentiating, circumscribing, stagnating, avoiding, and terminating. He talks about how, in this model, he talks about how the last 5 stages show how stress and how negative problems arise in a relationship. And through this, he shows how steps can be taken to avoid such negative impacts within a relationship to cause the break and fall of a relationship. The first stage I will be talking about is the initiating stage. The initiating stage is a very important stage because it basically talks about how 2 parties come together to form a relationship and how 2 people create interest with each other. So, this stage is very important because without you talking about how a relationship goes further and further, you have to explain how a relationship begins and how it flourishes. You can't talk about how the world is made without explaining how the universe is made. So basically, you have to talk about how two people form together to make a relationship. And this stage is restricted to conversation openers. It's really nothing. It's like going to a bar and how people describe each other and how people get to know each other, basically. And this stage is particularly hard for shy people because if someone has a problem of talking to another person and has a communication problem, this stage can be somewhat confusing and hard and difficult for them. And with this time and era of the internet and technology going further, social media has significantly created openers for shy people and made this destroy the barrier that they have and having difficulties talking to other people. It provides a denominator. That's the benefit of this stage. Of the internet. The second stage is experimenting. So this is the questions within this stage goes from, where are you from, what do you do? So it's when a party gets to know the other part of the other individual. And this stage is generally pleasant, and commitment is between parties is minimal because you get to know if you decide to take to another stage of a relationship, how you want to take it on with this person. And that explains the 4 useful purposes of this stage. First of all, it's a useful process to create openings for deeper conversations, increases chance for future friendships, reduces uncertainty, and creates familiarity, maintains sense of community with fellow human beings. So, in this sense, This is the next stage after initiating, because you get to know if you really want to take this on with another person. And this is a form of starting a friendship with another individual. The next stage after experimenting is intensifying. The intensifying stage is the beginning of every interpersonal relationship. This is when commitment has been taken to a broader stage, and commitment has been taken one step further. And a lot of touching is generally seen in this stage. It's very common for people to have feelings, and this is when a lot of emotions are involved within the stage. So the concept of metacommunication is also introduced and it's established. And metacommunication itself talks about, it's a state of reflecting how the communication between parties has been. So this is when both parties get to look beyond the look of the relationship and how they know the communication between each other is, if it's going well, if it's going bad. And this is how both parties know why they like this person more and how they know they can tune the relationship to become better. Less direct forms of communication are implemented, like spending time together, doing favors, trying to impress the other person, because you know you really want to put so much into the relationship, and this form of communication helps establish that. The next stage is integrating. So this is when the parties, the individuals, have formed a social unit and they decide to take the next stage after experimenting. They know that they are together and they feel comfortable. This is when understanding and trust is implemented into a relationship. And working together as a social unit is seen with this relationship. And a sense of obligation grows within these individuals, between the parties, expecting more from each other as they go on. And influences are created on each other, so parties start to speak alike, act alike, and do things because they know it's easier for them because they understand each other. This is the integrating stage because it shows the form of understanding and trust and unity. The next stage is bonding. This is the greatest act of commitment shown in any relationship. And usually the greatest act is usually by marriage. This is the most significant social act. It's the greatest symbolic public gesture that can be done. Though this model shows that it's particularly descriptive, as I said, about intimacy and romantic relationships, but it doesn't have to be romantic in some sense. Businesses also are also described with this stage, like when you have a business contract and initiation, because it shows a form of trust and it shows that a social trust has been shown. It's a great public gesture when associations are formed. And this stage shows the greatest form of public commitment. The next stage is differentiating. Okay, so this is the stage describing the 5 stages that have the negative effects that Mark talks about. Differentiating it's important to look at because you get to know how to relate to stress-related problems in a relationship. And differentiating happens when both parties have formed a common unit and need to reestablish their individual identities. Because relationships tend to engulf one another, and a positive differentiating stage happens when both people are put together as a unit, but also have individual sides. The differentiating stage has stress into it. So this is when parties have stress and show stress within the relationships. And confrontations occur, sometimes directly by telling them they don't have time to talk to the other party, or indirectly by leaving the room. And orientation from hold me tight to let me go happens within this stage. And it's important to know how to to take care of these situations. The next stage is circumscribing. Restrictions and restraints characterize this stage because this is when both parties want to feel the common unit, but they're tired, and because differentiating has occurred a lot of times, and this is when a lot of stress has gone into the relationship, and disagreement requires energy, and they don't want to put that much stress into the whole issue. And there was a lot of shrinking in interest between both parties. This stage talks about how relationships start to lose interest, and how relationships start to lose the feel and the whole commitment about each other. The next stage is stagnating. So this is when relationships become boring in some sense. This is called the boring stage, personally, because the relationship is seen as a shadow of itself. Parties behave in old, familiar ways without much feeling, and they don't want to stress much about the relationship. And it's because of continuous avoidance between both parties. Because a reflection at this stage shows that a commitment is slowly breaking apart between both parties, and it shows that no growth occurs within the relationship when it's supposed to imbue trust, but trust and commitment is being taken away. Avoidance stage. This stage has stagnation, and this stage shows unpleasant feelings between both parties, and the future of the relationship is very obvious because it's self-explanatory. They avoid each other. They don't want to have much about each other, and distance is created under the guise of excuses, or often most times it's direct, like they don't want to see each other. And as I said, the future of the relationship is very obvious. This is when the relationship has a downfall. The last stage of this model is terminating. The terminating stage is it's important to look at because you have to know why relationships rise and end. This stage can be short, it can be long, depending on what the other party feels and how the individuals feel about each other. This stage talks a lot shows a lot about how relationships lose communication between each other. And this stage comes to being because the sense of unity and communication is lost. And without communication, a relationship cannot function. And it shows that communication is very key at this stage, and unsuccessful couples deal with problems through avoidance and less involvement with one another. And it shows that communication is a very key part. I would like to end this presentation with two quotes. The meaning of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This talks about how relationships start, and it explains basically that relationships are never the same, and relationships change. And this other quote is by Jennifer Aniston. I think it's important to have closure in any relationship that ends from a romantic relationship to a friendship. You should always have a sense of clarity at the end and know why it began and why it ended. You need to know that in your life you need to move cleanly to the next phase. This quote talks about how relationships end, because the most problems with our generation when it comes to relationships because we never see why relationships end, and there was no form of closure. So, thank you. This is my presentation on relational development